Dzungaria is a geographical region in northwest China corresponding to the northern half of Xinjiang, also known as Beijiang, bounded by the Tian Shan mountain range to the south and the Altai Mountains to the north. It covers approximately 777,000 square kilometers, extending into western Mongolia and eastern Kazakhstan. Formerly the term could cover a wider area, conterminous with the Dzungar Khanate, a state led by the native Oirats in the 18th century which was based in the area, although geographically, historically, and ethnically distinct from the Turkic-speaking Tarim Basin area. The Qing dynasty and subsequent Chinese governments integrated both areas into one province, Xinjiang, as the center of Xinjiang's heavy industry, generator of most of Xinjiang's GDP, as well as containing its political capital Urumqi. Northern Xinjiang continues to attract intra-provincial and interprovincial migration to its cities. In comparison to southern Xinjiang, Dzungaria is relatively well integrated with the rest of China by rail and trade links. Etymology. The name Dzungaria as Dzungaria is a corruption of the Mongolian term Dzungar or Dzungar, depending on the dialect of Mongolian used. Dzun means left, and Gar means hand. The name originates from the notion that the Western Mongols are on the left-hand side when the Mongol Empire began its division into East and West Mongols. After this fragmentation, the Western Mongolian nation was called Dzungar. Background. Xinjiang consists of two main geographically, historically, and ethnically distinct regions: Dzungaria north of the Tian Shan Mountains and the Tarim Basin south of the Tian Shan Mountains. Before Qing China unified them into one political entity called Xinjiang Province in 1884. At the time of the Qing conquest in 1759, Dzungaria was inhabited by steppe-dwelling, nomadic Tibetan Buddhist Dzungar people, while the Tarim Basin was inhabited by sedentary, oasis-dwelling, Turkic-speaking Muslim farmers, now known as the Uyghur people. The Qing dynasty was well aware of the differences between the former Buddhist Mongol area to the north of the Tian Shan and Turkic Muslim south of the Tian Shan, and ruled them in separate administrative units at first. However, Qing people began to think of both areas as part of one distinct region called Xinjiang. The very concept of Xinjiang as one distinct geographic identity was created by the Qing, and it was originally not the native inhabitants who viewed it that way, but rather it was the Chinese who held that point of view. During the Qing rule, no sense of regional identity was held by ordinary Xinjiang people. Rather, Xinjiang's distinct identity was given to the region by the Qing, since it had distinct geography, history and culture, while at the same time it was created by the Chinese, multicultural, settled by Han and Hui, and separated from Central Asia for over a century and a half. In the late 19th century, it was still being proposed by some people that two separate parts be created out of Xinjiang: the area north of the Tian Shan and the area south of the Tian Shan, while it was being argued over whether to turn Xinjiang into a province. Dzungarian Basin. The core of Dzungaria is the triangular Dzungarian Basin, also known as Dzungar Basin, or in Chinese as the template ZH, as being considered for merging. Simplified Chinese, traditional Chinese, pinyin, Zhang with its central Gaban Tunga Desert. It is bounded by the Tian Shan to the south, the Altai Mountains to the northeast and the Tarbagatai Mountains to the northwest. The three corners are relatively open. The northern corner is the valley of the upper Oirats River. The western corner is the Dzungarian Gate, a historically important gateway between Dzungaria and the Kazakh steppe. Presently, a highway and a railway run through it, connecting China with Kazakhstan. The eastern corner of the basin leads to Gansu and the rest of China. In the south, an easy pass leads from Urumqi to the Turfan Depression. In the southwest, the tall Borohoro Mountains branch of the Tian Shan separates the basin from the upper Altai River. The basin is similar to the larger Tarim Basin on the southern side of the Tian Shan range. Only a gap in the mountains to the north allows moist air masses to provide the basin lands with enough moisture to remain semi-desert rather than becoming a true desert like most of the Tarim Basin, and allows a thin layer of vegetation to grow. This is enough to sustain populations of wild camels, jerboas, and other wild species. The Dzungarian Basin is a structural basin with thick sequences of Paleozoic Pleistocene rocks with large estimated oil reserves. The Gurban Tunga Desert, China's second largest, is in the center of the basin. The Dzungarian Basin does not have a single catchment center. The northernmost section of Dzungaria is part of the basin of the Irtysh River, which ultimately drains into the Arctic Ocean. The rest of the region is split into a number of endorheic basins. In particular, south of the Irtysh, the Ulungurh River ends up in the endorheic Lake Ulungurh. The southwestern part of the Dzungarian Basin drains into the Aibi Lake. In the west-central part of the region, streams flow into a group of endorheic lakes that include Lake Manus and Lake Alik. During the region's geological past, a much larger lake was located in the area of today's Manus Lake. It was fed not only by the streams that presently flow toward it, but also by the Irtysh and Ulungurh, which too were flowing toward the old Manus Lake at the time. The cold climate of nearby Siberia influences the climate of the Dzungarian Basin, making the temperature colder as low as -4 degrees Fahrenheit, and providing more precipitation, ranging from 3 to 10 inches, compared to the warmer, drier basins to the south. Runoff from the surrounding mountains into the basin supplies several lakes. The ecologically rich habitats traditionally included meadows, marshlands, and rivers. However, most of the land is now used for agriculture. It is a largely steppe and semi-desert basin surrounded by high mountains, the Tian Shan in the south and the Altai in the north. Geologically, it is an extension of the Paleozoic Kazakhstan bloc and was once part of an independent continent before the Altai Mountains formed in the late Paleozoic. It does not contain the abundant minerals of Kazakhstan and may have been a pre-existing continental bloc before the Kazakhstan bloc was formed. Urumqi, Yanning and Karamay are the main cities. Other smaller oasis towns dot the Piedmont areas. Paleontology, Dzungaria and its derivatives are used to name a number of prehistoric animals hailing from the rocky outcrops located in the Dzungar Basin. Dzungariptras vi. Yungarsuchus sloni. A recent notable find, in February 2006, is the oldest tyrannosaur fossil unearthed by a team of scientists from George Washington University who were conducting a study in the Dzungarian Basin. The species, named Guanlong, lived 160 million years ago, more than 90 million years before the famed Tyrannosaurus rex. Ecology. Dzungaria is home to a semi-desert steppe ecoregion known as the Dzungarian Basin Semi-Desert. The vegetation consists mostly of low scrub of Anabasis brevifolia. Taller shrublands of Saxhall bush and Ephedra prulski can be found near the margins of the basin. Streams descending from the Tian Shan and Altai ranges support stands of poplar together with Nitraria roborovski N. Sibirica, Agnathrum splendens, tamarisk, and willow. The northeastern portion of the Dzungarian Basin semi-desert lies within Great Gobi National Park, and is home to herds of onagers, goited gazelles and wild Bactrian camels. The basin was one of the last habitats of Prulski's horse, also known as the Dzungarian horse, which was once extinct in the wild, though it has since been reintroduced in areas of Mongolia and China. History. Before the 21st century, all a part of the region has been ruled or controlled by the Xiongnu Empire, Han Dynasty, Abe State, Rouran Khaganate, Turkic Khaganate, Tang Dynasty, Uyghur Khaganate, Liao Dynasty, Kara Khitan Khanate, Mongol Empire, Yuan Dynasty, Chagatai Khanate, Mofulistan, Kara-Del, Northern Yuan, Fora Oirats, the Dzungar Khanate, Qing Dynasty, the Republic of China, and, since 1950, the People's Republic of China. One of the earliest mentions of the Dzungaria region occurs when the Han Dynasty dispatched an explorer to investigate lands to the west, using the northernmost Silk Road trackway of about 2,600 kilometers in length, which connected the ancient Chinese capital of Xian to the west over the Wu Shaoling Pass to Wuvai and emerged in Kashgar. The Ostomy of the Gokturks received the lands of Dzungaria as an inheritance after the death of his father in the latter half of the 6th century AD. Dzungaria is named after a Mongolian kingdom which existed in Central Asia during the 17th and 18th centuries. It derived its name from the Dzungars, who were so called because they formed the left wing of the Mongolian army, self-named Oirats. Dzungar power reached its height in the second half of the 17th century, when Khaldan repeatedly intervened in the affairs of the Kazakhs to the west, but it was completely destroyed by the Kazakhs about 1757 to 1759. It has played an important part in the history of Mongolia and the great migrations of Mongolian stems westward. Its widest limit included Kashgar, Yarkand, Khotan, the whole region of the Tian Shan, and the greater proportion of that part of Central Asia which extends from 35 degrees to 50 degrees north and from 72 degrees to 97 degrees east. After 1761, its territory fell mostly to the Qing dynasty during the campaign against the Dzungars and partly to Russian Turkestan. The Qing subsequently began to repopulate the area with Turkey people from the south. The population in the 21st century consists of Kazakhs, Kyrgyz, Mongols, Uyghurs and Han Chinese. Since 1953, northern Xinjiang has attracted skilled workers from all over China who have mostly been Han Chinese to work on water conservation and industrial projects, especially the Karamai oil fields. Intraprovincial migration has mostly been directed towards Dzungaria also, with immigrants from the poor Uyghur areas of southern Xinjiang flooding to the provincial capital of Urumqi to find work. As a political or geographical term, Dzungaria has practically disappeared from the map, but the range of mountains stretching northeast along the southern frontier of the Jetisu, as the district to the southeast of Lake Balkhash, preserves the name of Dzungarian Altai. It also gave name to Dzungarian hamsters. Dzungaria and the Silk Road. A traveler going west from China must go either north of the Tian Shan Mountains through Dzungaria or south of the mountains through the Tarim Basin. Trade usually took the south side and migrations the north. This is most likely because the Tarim leads to the Fergana Valley and Iran, while the Dzungaria leads only to the open steppe. The difficulty with south side was the high mountains between the Tarim and Fergana. There is also another reason. The Taklamakan is too dry to support much grass, and therefore nomads when they are not robbing caravans. Its inhabitants live mostly in oases formed where rivers run out of the mountains into the desert. These are inhabited by peasants who are unwarlike and merchants who have an interest in keeping trade running smoothly. Dzungaria has a fair amount of grass, few towns to base soldiers in, and no significant mountain barriers to the west. Therefore, trade went south and migrations north. Today most trade is north of the mountains to avoid the mountains west of the Tarim because Russia is currently more developed. Economy: wheat, barley, oats, and sugar beets are grown, and cattle, sheep, and horses are raised. The fields are irrigated with melted snow from the permanently white-capped mountains. Dzungaria has deposits of coal, iron, and gold, as well as large oil fields.